I sold my first property that I had ever bought last year, and on paper, I should have made $100,000. But in reality, running the numbers, it made me question whether real estate investing was even worth it. So in this video, I'll share all of my numbers with you. What I earned, what I spent, what my ROI was, whether I should have rented, and everything that I wish I would have known before buying my first home and rental property. If you're new here, my name is Keenan and I've bought 3 properties by the time I was 30. And on this channel, I just want to give you the real facts of what I went through so that you don't make the same mistakes. So if that sounds good to you, hit that like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell below so you can join our growing family here on YouTube. So let's start off with the basics of this property that I sold. It was a 1-bedroom condo here in Hawaii. Technically, it's one of those reserved housing units. So basically, to make a long story short, I was able to buy the property at a cheaper rate and I had to pay back some shared equity when I sold the home. So if you look at all of my numbers, everything's based off of a purchase price of $434,746. But the shared equity portion had appraised the unit at $480,000. So when I sold the home, that was actually my basis. But everything on the loan side of things was based off of that lower home purchase price. And then last year I sold this home for $580,000. So for all intents and purposes, to not muddy the whole waters of the shared equity thing, bought it for $480,000, sold it for $580,000. I used this home as my primary residence for a couple years, but I also used this home as a rental property for a couple years. So with that in mind, now we'll break down all of my costs and everything that I put into the property and what I got when I sold the property. So let's get into it. So because this was a reserved housing unit, I was able to only put 10% down to secure the unit. So my down payment on this property was $43,476. And then you have your monthly payments on the home. So when I had initially closed on the home, it was at a 4.375% interest rate. I then refinanced down to a 2.99% interest rate. But basically that interest rate, for those of you that don't know, will set your monthly payment to the bank that's loaning you the money. That monthly payment is made up of a principal payment and an interest payment. The principal payment goes to your loan pay down. The interest payment is just interest that you pay to the bank or whoever is your lender. So the amount of principal that I paid towards this loan was $35,180. The amount of interest that I paid on this loan was $62,125. So someone may be thinking, why is your principal payment so much lower than your interest payment? And just to save you some of the math, basically the way that they handle all of these loan payments is they make you pay a bunch of interest up front when you first start the loan, and as you start to pay down the principal balance, that thing levels out. So then towards the back end of your 30-year loan, you're actually paying more principal than interest, and it all kind of evens out and they amortize it over the loan. But yes, early on in your loan, you will always pay more interest than principal. And because I lived in a condominium, I have maintenance fees. And the maintenance fees on this condo actually initially started at 60 cents a square foot, and it increased to $1 per square foot. This is a brand new build, and this may be a tendency depending on the developer of your condominiums, but that's kind of a little pro tip, is just understand that maintenance fees in condos exist and they can and tend to increase over time. So over the 5 years that I had the property, I paid $31,496 in maintenance fees. I then paid $12,816 in taxes and insurance, and that included my PMI that I initially had because I didn't have 20% down. That includes my property taxes, that includes my homeowner's insurance. So all of that, basically everyone will pay, I guess, minus the maintenance fees if you own a regular home. But that is just what I paid towards my home for the entirety of the 5 years. But there's added costs when you buy and sell a home that maybe you're not aware of, and that's called closing costs. And basically these are the costs that you're paying to either your realtor, the bank, whoever, to basically help process your loan and process the sale of your home. So when I bought my home, the closing cost on that was $12,289. And that is just kind of like your fee to be able to buy the home. And when you sell a home, you actually have to pay even more because you have to pay a realtor's commission, you have your title, escrow, all those different other fees. For me, I also had condo documents that needed to get transferred over. So the closing cost on the sale of my home was $32,762, $28,000 of that being the seller's commission. So all in all, the down payment, all my monthly payments that I made, all the taxes I paid, even the taxes on like my rental property, the closing costs involved, I paid $230,864 for this property. That's how much it cost me over the 5 years. And now let's look at what I earned on this property. So starting with the sale of the home, I sold the home for $580,000 and I had $410.99, which is a very weird number to say, but I had that amount left on my loan. So the total earnings on that was $169,901. But also, as I stated earlier, I used this property as a rental for a couple years. So the rental income on this was $59,781. And all these numbers take into account my property management fees, taxes, all that kind of stuff. So these are all of my numbers, including all of those things that you have to consider. And the final portion of my earnings is the tax benefits that you get from owning real estate. And it's different when you use it as a primary residence and when you use it as a rental. So by owning real estate, the interest that you pay on your loan is actually deductible from your taxes. And obviously discuss with your tax person. You know, I'm just some dude. But it's not like, say, if you pay $10,000 worth of interest, it's not like you get $10,000 back. It's just that the $10,000 gets subtracted from your total income for the year, so you don't get taxed on that. So depending on what bracket you're in, you just gain that percentage of money that you would have been taxed on had you not owned the real estate. When you own it as a rental property, you can write off stuff like your maintenance fees, your property management fees, things like that. So the total tax benefits that I'm estimating here, because I'm not an accountant, is around $16,317. So with the sale price, the rental income, and all the tax benefits, my total earnings on this property was $245,999. So looking at my costs, and looking at my earnings, does this mean I only made $15,315 over the 5 years? Like, doesn't that like blow your mind? Like when you look at that first figure, that's why I said it made me think like, what am I doing? Right, I spent all this money, did all this gymnastics, you know, having to close on the loan, having to deal with a tenant, having to find a property manager, you know, if something went wrong with the unit. And it's just like, I did all of this just to make $15,000 over 5 years? And then after I like settled myself a little bit, I said, okay, in order for me to not get everything all wild, I have to think about what my alternatives would have been. So I had to dig deeper into this. It gets a little complicated because part of this was a rental, and to compare like different lifestyles or theoretical lifestyles of what it would have been if I rented it, or if I rented with like a significant other, all that kind of stuff just gets too complicated to really look at it value to value. But what I can look at is, what did I put into the property versus what do I get out of it from an initial standpoint? So looking at it this way, my initial investment into the property was my down payment and my closing costs. So that came out to $55,765. So that is the amount of my initial investment. And the reason why I'm looking at it this way is because my monthly payments on my mortgage, my insurance, all that stuff is roughly the same amount that I would have paid in rent for a similar property in the area. Like my cash flow on my property was basically nothing. So that's why I can wipe that out and just take a look at that initial investment and where did that get me. So that initial $55,765 investment grew to what? And that value would be the sale price minus my outstanding loan balance minus the closing costs for the sale, because that's a real cost. I didn't actually get the full value of my sale price. So doing the math on that, it gives me a final value of $137,139. So my $55,765 investment has grown to just over $137,000. Extrapolating that out, that's nearly a 20% return over 5 years, which is a pretty good return on my money. But what if I had just put that $55,000 into the S&P 500 for the years? So I did the math on that. So I just took the $55,000 and then I put in the wins and the losses per year for the S&P 500 year over year, because that's just how I invest. I'm not a big like stock picking guy. That's all I would have done, just put it in the market, just set it, forget it, see where it ended up. And that gave me roughly a 15% return year over year, which is not bad either. And that's something that made me really think a little bit about whether or not this whole thing was worth it, right? Was that extra 5% return worth all the hassle of dealing with real estate? I mean, the amount of effort that you have to go through to close on the different loans, get all your paperwork together, especially running the rental property with your property manager, finding a tenant, and dealing with the sale of the home and all the showings and all that kind of stuff with your realtor, like maybe that's worth 5%? And for me, I'm like right on the fence. Obviously not a lot to complain about. Both situations would give me pretty good returns, but at least you can see for yourself what these real numbers look like, and you can do the math for yourself on your deals. So if you're thinking about starting your real estate investing journey, or you're thinking about buying a home, here's things that I wish I would have known, or things that I think you should consider when you're going through that process. First and foremost, and probably most important, is you make the most amount of money, I believe, when you buy anything. The price at which you initially pay for at the beginning, to me, is the biggest point of your opportunity when it comes to real estate investing. I knew when I bought it at $480,000 that it was in a desirable area, that it would have that kind of appreciation. And sure enough, it had that big appreciation. But that's why, like, if you really look at it, I needed to have $100,000 of appreciation, you know, just on paper, in order for me to make any sort of profit on the property. So making sure you get the right deal deal and you're not overextending yourself and you're not overpaying. Like it's the kind of diamonds in the rough. Like that is the most important action I think you can take to set yourself up for success in real estate, is to making sure that you have the correct buy. And that kind of runs into my next tip, is about running the numbers and seeing if buying is even worth it for you. Especially if you're going to use it as a primary residence, take a look and see what your mortgage payment is going to be at whatever interest rate you think you can get. And then look and see what that comparable rent would be in the area. So as we kind of talked about, for me, it would have been roughly the same. So it made a lot of sense because I thought I would get appreciation and I would have a little bit of principal pay down. So it's like a little forced savings account for my situation. But if you're gonna save like $2,000, $1,500 a month by renting, it may make more sense for you to rent and just invest the difference into the market in a more passive way. The next thing to consider, especially if you're gonna buy a condo, is just know about the maintenance fees and just assume the potential that this thing might double. And when you're in a condo, you're also part of an association, and the board there makes the decisions for you unless you're on the board, but you don't really have control over that kind of stuff. And especially with the whole insurance market, you know, all of those premiums you can get assessed. That's why, especially when you're buying a condo, you have to make sure your numbers make sense and you have some buffer so that even though prices increase, you're still going to be okay. And condo maintenance fees only go up, because nothing in a building, anything that you build, is ever going to improve in quality and standard over time. From the minute you buy, everything is deteriorating, getting closer to breaking. And that's why your maintenance fee increase can sometimes eat into your opportunity as a real estate investor. On the similar line next to that, talking about home repairs. So I feel like the sweet spot on when you sell your home, obviously when you sell your primary residence, you get that tax benefit where you don't pay the capital gains tax if you lived in your home for 2 out of the last 5 years. But I think you don't want to wait too long to the point where you have to replace your roof, to the point where you have to really do some infrastructure changes, because you figure if you spend 25 grand on re-roofing your house, that could be a year's worth of appreciation that you're just throwing away. And my last point, and that's something that really rang true for me and really why I sold my home in the first place, was that liquidity and getting access to your cash is so important, especially in this market. When I was trying to buy a new home, it wasn't competitive for me to say, oh, I need to sell this condo, and then I'll have enough to put the down payment. People just dismissed my offer immediately. So that's why after you get that initial appreciation from your buy in real estate, I think it might make a lot of sense for you to sell, get that equity out, and then just invest it into the markets where it's a little bit easier for you to get that cash if you need to make a move on anything from an investment standpoint. So for me personally, as somebody who had almost all of my net worth in real estate, like I want to move more towards stocks. I want to move more towards things that are way more passive. I just dollar cost average to the S&P 500. And sure, maybe I'm leaving some money on the table, but I don't have to deal with repairs of a home. I don't have to deal with a tenant. And if I need that cash, I don't have to wait months for a sale or to make sure that there's showings or pay a real estate commission. But if I didn't put myself through this process, I would have never learned any of this anyway, so I'm thankful for that process anyway. So I hope this video was helpful for you and gave you kind of a real look into what is involved in buying a home, all the costs, and what happens when you sell a home and all the actual costs that come with that as well. If you have any questions about anything I covered in this video, if anything was confusing, please comment below and I'll do my best to reply to you. My goal is to help everybody not make the same mistakes that I did. So if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell below so you can join our growing family here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next video.